Hello, everyone, and welcome to Florida Data Science Academy. I'll be your instructor, Dr. Dylan Sinnickson. And today in this short YouTube tutorial, we're going to be going over an important concept that's difficult for a lot of people, which are for loops. So I'm actually going to describe to you an easier way to do for loops using the seek along function. I think it's a lot more intuitive for people, especially younger students who are struggling to understand kind of the concepts and ideologies behind for loops. So we're going to start off by creating three different classes. So I'm using this rnorm function, which stands for random numbers from a normal distribution. So I have classes 1, 2, and 3. Each one of the classes has 20 students consisting of 20 different grades. So we have different means for our class grades, and we have also different standard deviations for our class grades. So after we create these three sets of grades for our three different classes, we're going to store all of those classes in one list. So this list will consist of three different elements, which are going to be class 1, 2, and 3. Let's actually just print out some of the classes, the class grades. So we have class 1, so we have some 70s, class 2, and a class 3. So what I want to do is I want to use a for loop where I'm actually going to add 5 percentage points to each one of these three classes. So I could do this manually where I just take class 1 and I add 5 and class 2 and add 5, but that's a little bit tedious, and I want to show you a more efficient way using for loops to accomplish that task. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this for loops syntax where I'm going to call the ith element and I'm going to use the seek along function. So this is why this is the concept that makes for loops a lot more intuitive for a lot of different people. So we're going to use the seek along function, and I'm going to call the list that we're going to work with, which is going to be classes. So I'm going to perform some task over each one of the elements of this list called classes. So it's going to, what I'm going to try to do is add 5 percentage points to each one of these classes. So then I'm going to open up my brackets, and I'm going to call the print function, and I'm going to call classes, and I'm going to use double square brackets because this is we're working with a list, and I'm going to call the ith element in classes. So I'm going to print that value out in addition to adding 5 to the value. So hopefully, when we run this for loop, R is going to call each element in the list called classes, and then it's going to add 5 percentage points to all of the class grades. So if I run lines 14 to 16, we can see that R has successfully printed out each one of the grades from each one of the classes. So for example, we can take class 1, we have a 70, a 76, and a 74. Those change to 75, 81, and 79. So we have class 1 here, then we have class 2, and we have class 3. So if you are familiar with traditional syntax of using for loops, you probably would have used the syntax that I'm going to describe to you right now, which would have been the ith element in 1 to the length of classes. And then we'll actually just copy and paste this same syntax that we used earlier. So what this is doing is that we have a vector essentially from 1 to 3. So we have the elements 1, 2, and 3. And then R is basically just going to substitute each one of these numbers in for the ith element in this list called classes. And the seek along function, I think it's a lot more intuitive for a lot of people, and it's actually doing the same thing. So if I highlight seek along on line 14, we can see that just running that function on classes has the same output as if we just ran this line of code on line 18. It's just calling 1, 2, and 3. So it's just going to be substituting this element. So the ith element, it's going to be substituting a 1, a 2, and a 3 each time for this for loop that we're running here. And so we can use the seek along function, which I think is very helpful. We can also use the more traditional methodology, which says 1 to the length of a given a given list. And then let's actually do some more practice where we're actually going to do the same test that we did on line 15, but we're going to be storing each one of those values into a list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a new object called smarter classes, and that's going to be equal to an open list. So when we're going to save objects from a for loop to another object, we actually have to first create an open list or an open vector of some sort so we can actually store those values that we're creating in the for loop to a given object. So I'm going to create smarter classes on line 22, and then I'm going to call a for loop. So I'm going to use the same syntax that I used earlier for the ith element in this seek along function of classes. See, I can just copy and paste that in here. And then I'm going to open my brackets. And if I want to store objects to a given list or a vector, I'm going to have to first call that list that I'm interested in. And then we're going to, because this is a list, we're going to have to use double square brackets. I'm going to call the ith element, and I'm going to set that equal to the classes object, where we're going to take each individual class, so the ith element in that longer list of 3 different classes, and then I'm just going to add 5 percentage points to each one of those class grades. And then if I run line 22, and then I run lines 23 to 25, hopefully when I call smarter classes, we can basically get the same grades that we printed out on lines 14 to 16, but they're going to be saved as individual objects. So now when I run smarter classes, we can see that the classes, the new smarter higher grades are partitioned in class 1, 2, and 3, and we added 5 percentage points for each one of our students. So that's another example using the seek along function. Now I'm going to leave you guys with the last example, where I'm going to call an object called new classes. And this, again, is going to be open to an open list. And I'm actually going to combine a for loop and an if statement. So what I'm going to do is I just want to add 5 percentage points to the first class, and then the rest of the classes, I want to actually subtract 5 percentage points for each one of the students' grades. So we're going to have an if statement, which is going to say if the ith element is equal to that first class, we're going to do one task. And if it's not equal to that first class, then we're going to perform a different task. And again, we're going to be using the seek along syntax. So I can call for the ith element with the seek along function. So we're going to be moving along that object called classes from 1, 2, and 3. And then we can open our brackets, and I'm going to call an if statement. So if that ith element is equal to 1, so if we're in class 1, we're going to perform a certain task, which is going to be, we're going to save the first object of new classes equal to the ith element of classes. So that'll be the first class, and then we're going to add 5 percentage points, right? So if we're working with the first class, the ith element's equal to 1, we're going to do this function, which is going to be adding 5 percentage points. But if that's not true, if the ith element is not equal to 1, then we're going to perform a different task. So we're going to set new classes equal to the classes object that we're currently working with, and then we're actually going to subtract 5 percentage points. So if we're going to move along this list called classes, which has the 3 different classes. If we're working with class 1, we're going to add 5 percentage points, and if we're not working with class 1, we're actually going to subtract 5 percentage points. So hopefully, when we run this new line of code, we can actually print out new classes. And we can see that we have that class 1, so these are the higher grades, 75, 81, and 79. I think we had those earlier. That's right. But now we're actually going to, so let's take a look at class .2. So the original values for class 2 were 79, 86, 83. Now we subtracted 5 percentage points. So now we have 74, we have an 81 and a 78. And hopefully it did the same thing for class 3. So if I type out class .3, the original values were 71, 87, and 55. And then if I look at the new values for class 3, we have 66, 82, and 50. So those are a couple of techniques that I think are helpful for working with for loops. I think for a lot of new students, using the seek along function is a lot more intuitive. But this is probably the more traditional syntax where you're using the ith element in one to a length of a given object. And then we also added in an if statement to make things a little bit more difficult. And we also learned how to save certain elements to a given object when we're working within a for loop. So I hope that tutorial was helpful, and stay tuned for more Florida Data Science Academy videos. I'm your instructor, Dylan Sinnickson, and thanks a lot for your time.